Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. My name is Mohammed Aman and I'm the Global Network Associate of the Global Legal Empowerment Network based in Kenya. Thank you for joining our webinar today and our apologies for the long silence earlier. We were just trying to get our teams organized and get everyone who is going to present today ready from our end. It's Monday, October 14th, and today we're joined by my colleagues, Jaron Vogelsang, David Arach, Aileen Wakesho, and Sophia Dhiambo from Namati's Community Land Protection Program, along with Felista Manti, a community member and a paralegal from Lenguruma in Isiolo, and Francis Meitame, a community member and paralegal from Kukubi in Kajiado, for sharing learnings on community land rights, legal empowerment, and the power of people-driven advocacy. Before we get too far into today's presentation, I have some brief housekeeping items. Firstly, take note that this event is being recorded and we will share the full recording and highlights later on our website. I also want to make sure that you can hear well and are able to use our webinar system. You will see a questions panel where you can type in your comments and communicate with us. There is also a button for raising your hand to get our attention. Feel free to try it now. Please type in your comments, ideas, suggestions, best practices in the questions panel as we move along. We want to hear from you. We will also have questions for discussion in the second half of our webinar. Please bear with us as my colleagues respond to your various requests and comments. From the network, we'll be fielding your questions today and taking notes as well. I'd also like to introduce you to the Global Legal Empowerment Network. The network is a growing community of now more than 1,800 organizations and 6,000 individuals from around the globe who are working to advance justice. Members include human rights activists and grassroots organizers. It includes advocates and educators, lawyers and community paralegals, researchers, policymakers, and public servants. Through the network, these practitioners are able to come together to collaborate and learn from each other, both online and through in-person events. We share ideas, challenges, best practices, and resources. Last year, members of the network launched the Justice for All campaign, calling on world leaders to increase financing and protections for grassroots justice defenders. You can join the network on our website at namati.org. Membership is free and open to all. Just complete a short sign-up form on the website after this webinar. We will be sharing the link to join if you're interested. We'd love to have you in our community. So today's webinar will feature a conversation with community leaders from Kajiado and Isiolo and Namati Community Land Protection Program team members. I would now like to invite my colleague and director of the Community Land Protection Program, Jaron, to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for that introduction. We really appreciate it. I just want to start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's participating on today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We're really looking forward to the discussion that will follow our presentation. I also wanted to give a very special thank you to Philister and Francis, who are both joining us from their communities. They don't have great internet network where they are, so we are actually calling them on the phone, and their phones are right next to our computers. So hopefully you'll be able to hear them well, and just thank you both so much for participating. I wanted to start off by just telling a very brief story. Just 2 months ago, on July 24th, women and men from 11 indigenous communities from all across Kenya came together in Nairobi and marched to the Ministry of Lands. With unprocessed forms to register their community lands in their hands, they demanded themselves from the government that their forms are processed and that their legal land rights are recognized and protected. For more than 3 years, the legal process by which these communities could register and own their common lands had completely stalled out. But within a single day of marching, community members had seized the attention of the public, the media, and key government officials. Under public pressure, the Ministry of Lands promised to process the community's applications for their community lands within 4 months. You know, in our field, I think sometimes we tend to focus so much on the challenges and the setbacks that sometimes we don't take the time to celebrate or learn from our victories. We have not had a full victory yet, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. And we're excited for you to join us today as we reflect on the legal empowerment journey of these inspiring communities. Throughout the next half hour or so, we're going to focus on the following questions. First, what are customary indigenous land rights and why are they important? Secondly, how did community members learn how to use the law to begin the process of registering their customary land claims, and what did they do? Next, how can legal empowerment equip the people most affected by injustice to advocate for themselves rather than someone advocating on their behalf? And then finally, what comes next? How will the communities build on this interim victory that we will describe fully over the next 30 minutes to fully realize their land rights? So with that in mind, I would like to pass it over to my colleague, Eileen, who will give you just a little bit of background on community land in Kenya and the context that these communities are working in.
Thank you very much, Jaron. Next slide. So maybe just to help you understand the context of land in Kenya, over the last 50 years, land has been one of the most contentious, politically charged, and complicated issues in this country. Land that has historically been owned and managed by indigenous communities is under threats by multinational companies, local and foreign elites, but also from the Kenyan government. The most vulnerable of communities, including women, ethnic minorities, and indigenous people that draw their identity, their culture, but also their lives and livelihoods from this land are facing unprecedented threats from major infrastructure projects. Some of these projects include the Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopian corridor, popularly known as the LAPSET, and the recent oil discoveries, among many other infrastructure projects. These projects have accelerated the allocation of community land to investors, but also to government and government agencies without communities' free, prior, and informed consent. It's important to appreciate that for these indigenous communities, land is just not any asset, but it means much more to them. And I want to invite Francis, one of our paralegals who comes from Kukubi community, to walk you through what land means to him, but also to his community. Francis?
Community land to us in my community of Maasai means a lot. It means a lot because it is our source of livelihood. This is where we graze our cattle. This is where we live. This is where we do our cultural activities. This is where actually this is our heritage. This is where God gave. This is which land that God gave us. It's our identity as Maasai. However, over the years we have been having a lot of dread in losing this only land that is left in the country, in which many people term as idle land, because we have kept it over the years undisturbed, with a lot of livestock, with a lot of natural resources, with a lot of animals and such like. So this is what they have been terming as idle land, but it is not idle. We were using it, we are still using it. This is our livelihood, although we are experiencing some of those threats. So those are some of the things that we are undergoing. The threats include actually powerful people stealing our land. One. Another thing is that we do not even get correct funding from the animals that live within our land. Actually, where I stay, animals that in my community lands are more than the ones that live in two national parks. That is Southwest National Park and Amboseli National Park. The ones that live in my community exceed those that live in those two national parks altogether. So you can see and we get nothing in return as keeping these animals over the years, being the heritage of their country, and the country gets a lot of money from these animals. We also have a threat of losing this land permanently to powerful people from the government. We lose it to those national parks because they keep on chopping up land from our community land, saying like just 10 years ago they created a new one called the Chulu National Park, which was not there. So Kukubi lost about 1,200 acres to that. So those are some of the threats that we are undergoing as a community. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Francis. Clearly, what Francis helps us understand is that this land that we're talking about to them is their identity, it's their heritage, it's their lives. And so when this land is taken away from them, it means what has been taken away from them is their lives, it's their livelihoods. I'm going to also ask Felista to equally help us understand what this land means to communities from Lenguruma, where she comes from. Felista?
Yes, as pastoralist, land is everything, source of livelihood, culture, and identity. Without land, we would not exist as people, but we are also facing new threats against our land. Example, now that we don't have title deed, the community have a lot of worries about their land. In the grazing areas, some communities might come to graze their cattle without briefing the elders, which brings conflict. As grazing on land that is kept apart is also a threat because they will be fined among the community. As women, we use the land in our own ways. We gather herbs and traditional medicine, we fetch water, firewood, and we have small gardens where we grow some vegetables for our families. Land means so much to us. We will be nothing without it.
Thank you very much, Felista. I mean, you've heard it from Felista. For women like Felista, it's where they, get their medicinal herbs. It's where they fetch their firewood. It's where they, grow their food. And really, just like Francis earlier said, it's everything to them. And this is the land that we're talking about today.
So thank you very much, Eileen. I mean, all of this paints a rather dire picture that the land that Francis and Filister's communities are living on is land that is under constant threat. But thankfully, several years ago, a new law was passed in Kenya that opens up a huge number of opportunities for communities like their communities to legally protect their rights. But there's also some challenge with this law. And I'd like to invite my colleague David to give us a little information about this law, the opportunities and the challenges.
Thank you, Jaron. Thank you so much. We've heard from Felista and Francis about their parent challenge and what land actually means to them. I will be sharing more about the opportunity that we have and also the challenges that we still face. So again, Kenya in 2016 passed a law, the Community Land Act, which is quite progressive and gives the communities an opportunity to legally register and own their lands. Now, indigenous and other marginalized groups have always faced a challenge in exercising their rights. We are talking about an estimated 3.5 million people who live on about 1,500 square miles of unregistered land. This is an equivalent of about 67% of Kenya's land mass. The Community Land Act provides an opportunity for these communities to register, to legally claim and own their lands and make decisions over this land, shaping their livelihoods, their culture, and their identity. Yet, despite the passage of this law, to date, there are still some challenges. The law is complicated, it has not been widely publicized, and the government has not deployed the necessary systems and personnel to implement it throughout the country. Even though the law was passed 3 years ago, there still is a gap in terms of presentation. No single community has been able to successfully register their lands. However, something happened. On July 24th, there was a celebration because over 50 representatives from 11 communities that come from 5 different counties, namely Isiolo, Kajiado, Laikipia, Tana River, and Turkana. Representatives from these communities traveled to Nairobi and decided to march to the ministry office. They met the Deputy Director of Land Adjudication. They also met high-level officials from the Cabinet Secretary's office. In this meeting, they placed in their demand for registration and acknowledgement of their ownership. The ministry acknowledged and promised to process their applications in the next 4 months. This was quite popular. It was aired on national TV, national newspapers, and it got discussions going on. This was quite unprecedented. No community had ever applied for registration, so it has potential for setting precedents and setting tone around commit land registration in Kenya. Thank you. I would love to invite Francis to share briefly around his experience because he participated in the march to the ministry. I would love Francis to share what you thought were the impacts and outcomes from this activity.
Yeah, I participated in the 24th of July, marching into the Ministry of Land in demanding the registration of our land. I traveled with 15 other members, so 16 of us from my land of Kukubi to join other communities that David has just highlighted. We went to the ministry. One of the best things we got there is that they promised that in the next 4 months, they will have put in place registrars of finished lands where we can access. Those are our counties. Again, that's the biggest promise they gave to us. Another thing that we got is that I, as a legal and an active, people from my community and other communities, we feel empowered. We feel empowered to go directly into such a ministry because before, none of us ever even went to the counties or to the regional offices for such claims. It was a big empowerment ministry to march into the ministry and talk directly to high-level personnel there. That was actually an encouragement. It told us it's actually we feel that we are actually part and parcel of owning land in Kenya. Before that, people are actually advocating for our own rights before this thing we got. So we feel that we actually are advocating for something that belongs to us. That's another positive impact of that. Another thing is that we know our rights now and the government, and we can actually hold the government responsible for what we demand. Not that we want from them or we beg for, but we demand the right. That's another engagement that we go there. And yes, when we went to the Ministry of Land, they say that they will put the registrars in the counties, and we will actually apply from there because it is usually hard to go to the national office, which is congested and get such an opportunity. From the offices in our counties, we'll be able to do the application for the form that the law allows for and actually get our land registered. So those are some of the things that myself feel from that much the community and the entire community and thousands of communities that they are actually are eager to register their land, who feel that their land is actually not secure before the application and registration of their land. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francis. I will hand over to my colleague, Jaron.
Thank you, Francis. That was wonderful to hear your experience. I mean, what you just described, I think, is the true definition of legal empowerment. You and your community first learned what the law says, and then you used the law to meet the requirements and begin the process of registering your community land. And then when the government wasn't holding up their end of the bargain, you took it into your own hands. You said you weren't going to sit there and just wait, or you weren't going to have an NGO represent you, but you were going to go straight to the ministry and demand that the government follows its own law. That's so powerful, and we really appreciate you sharing. Just before we move on, I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have any questions to Francis, Phyllis, or any of the presenters, feel free to put those in the question box and go to webinar, and we'll return to those towards the end. So what Francis just described and the type of legal empowerment that he feels as an individual and his community feels as a group, it was not an easy journey to get to that point. Starting back in early 2018, Namati and its partner organizations, Ilaramata Community Concerns, Indigenous Movement for Peace Advancement and Conflict Transformation, or IMPACT, Samburu Women's Trust, and Kenya Land Alliance have trained and deployed community land paralegals to help communities understand the Community Land Act, meet the requirements for land registration, and organize to demand that their applications are processed in a timely manner. Each of the 11 communities discussed, drafted, and adopted detailed bylaws for local land management and governance. Many of the rules that were created by the communities include rights protections for women, youth, and other marginalized people, often for the very first time. The bylaws also included rules for climate change resilience and environmental protection. The communities also elected community land management committees to manage the day-to-day affairs of the community's land and natural resources. In the past, only male elders made decisions over community land. Now, the committees include women and youth, ensuring that all people have a voice in decisions about their land and natural resources. Can you move to the next slide? In addition to those things, each community agreed on the boundaries of their communities with their neighbors and created evidence of their land claims by making maps. Some communities created detailed maps using GPS, while others drew maps based on natural boundaries like rivers and mountains. This documentation will empower communities to guide surveyors when the government creates technical maps of their lands. Most importantly, in my opinion, however, the communities truly know the law and the rights they have over their land and natural resources. They are empowered to meet with high-level government officials, like how Francis described, and demand that the government follows their own laws. You know, I was just with this amazing group of representatives a few days ago and out in the community. And one of the things that really struck me was Francis, Philister, and their community members know they're representing thousands of other communities in Kenya whose land is at risk and could be protected using the Community Land Act. What they're doing is such an incredibly powerful example of what communities all over this country can do. You know, if given just a little bit of support to help know the law, use the law, and shape the law. So with that in mind, I would actually like to hand it over to Sophie Ediambo, who just joined Namati a week ago and was out in the field with us, just to share some observations about what you saw as someone that's really new to this work.
Thank you, Jaron. Having joined Namati's Community Land Protection Program last Monday, I had the opportunity to travel to Isiolo on Wednesday and be part of a community-led meeting. What stood out for me was seeing how the community knew and understood the law and are now using it to make claims over their land. For example, they explained how in the past resources such as sand would be taken from their land and they were unable to stop that. However, they now understand the power they have and are able to question such activities. Also, what stood out for me is the number of women present. That was very inspiring and seeing them actively participate and contribute in discussions and their voices being heard. Francis and Felisa will now take us through significant impacts of legal empowerment from their perspectives. Francis?
Hello. The impact, definitely the knowledge of, or the impact of the law, and we too has a lot of impact in the ground. It has a lot of impact to the community. It has a lot of impact to activists and paralegals to knowing the law. Because we now know the law, we know our rights. We have confidence actually demanding it from the government, demanding our rights from the government. We will now have less conflict when we view the maps from the GPS. We will have less conflict with our other communities, less conflict with actually the government, bodies like the national parks around us. We as pastoral communities now have a peace of mind that we will not lose our land, because we now know that we own land, and in the process we'll have peace of mind, so we will not lose a part of our land that for years have been earmarked as actually idle land in Kenya, or have just been said as a land without use. So we now join other communities or other rights of ownership of land. A community land will now equal a private land. It will now equal actually a public land. So we now have ownership of our land and have peace of mind. Yes.
Thank you, Francis. We also have Felista share from her experience.
Yes, as the Nkuruma community, we now know the law, we know our rights, we have the confidence to demand what is ours. We have bylaws and a committee to manage our land and natural resources. There is less conflict and better use of land and natural resources now. Also, community who are more empowered, especially women who don't participate during meetings, but now they are equal in participation. The community consider women to be full members of the community and have the same land use and access rights as men. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis and Felista.
Yeah, with all these discussions, you almost want to think that we are already there, and maybe we need to stop and start to celebrate. But clearly, we are not there yet. The journey still continues, and so just focusing on, what's next. And I'm going to ask David to speak to us on this.
Thank you so much, Aileen. As you might have all noticed, that the people, the affected people, are the ones who have been pushing for change, coming from the principle that sustainable change is that which is pushed for by especially the affected people. That the concept of people power, the concept of citizen-driven advocacy is what we are leveraging on here. I will give you an example. Together with other CSOs in Kenya, we had sought audience of officials and the ministry for several months, and yet we wouldn't get it. Guess what? When the community representatives showed up, in less than an hour, they had gotten the audience. And the ministry attended to them, listened to them, and promised that they would process their applications. There's a lot of power in people. All it takes is organization, knowledge of the law and entitlement, and the people can for sure stand up for their claim. That is what we see as quite vital when it comes to advocacy.
And in this case, it was so interesting that the power of the people was much stronger than power of NGOs and CSOs in this case. And that was a really big learning for us and something that we're going to continue throughout all of the work that we do. So thank you, David. And I just want to pass it back to Eileen to spend a couple minutes talking about what comes next.
Thanks, Jaron and David. Yes, so clearly we're focusing on what is next. And as we've just had, the power that lies with an organized community. And so for us as an institution, we are keen to continue to support communities to sustain this momentum. Just last week, we had representatives, so a smaller group from the group that came in the month of July, to come back to the ministry again and have a conversation with the ministry to see where the applications are at, any gaps that their applications have, and how they can continue to follow through the applications to ensure that the process continues with no delays. And so that for sure would continue to be our commitment, to continue to work with these communities until their applications are fully processed. We know that, as communities continue to push through this voice, we need to continue to support them as organizations. And so together with other national CSOs, we are committing to sustaining advocacy efforts at national, but also at county level, so that we are able to demand for adequate resourcing to be able to implement the law. And our commitment is to inject a legal empowerment that focuses on ensuring that the whole process focuses on people, is participatory, and is committed to ensuring that no one is left behind. We want to be able to document these incredible lessons that we've learned, for instance, the power that lies with communities, and to be able to share these experiences so that other communities that want to follow through this process are able to have something that they can look at, follow through, and get inspired to be able to equally push forward and to sustain this struggle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eileen. And unfortunately, the challenges that these communities are facing are not unique just to Kenya. Indigenous and marginalized and local communities all over Africa and all over the world face similar challenges. And we really hope that sharing some of the learning and knowledge that community members like Francis and Phyllis have gotten will help influence how practitioners like ourselves think about this really all over the world. And we're looking forward to just really sharing those lessons, and also at this point really moving into a discussion and answering your questions, and also hearing your ideas. We certainly don't have it all figured out, and we would love your thoughts as well. So Mohammed, I wonder if you could get us started with the questions at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Jaron, for that presentation and for the rest of the team. So just a few apologies. You may hear a bit of background noise. It's raining in Nairobi heavily at that, so please bear with us as we continue. We actually have a few questions from members who've attended. From Natalie Forer. Natalie, I don't know if you're able to share your question with us. I'll just try and unmute you, and then you can ask your question directly. But in case we're not able to get you, I'll go ahead and ask it on your behalf. So yeah, I can't see Natalie still, but her question is, how did you manage to increase the participation of women in the process? What were the main key elements to make it work? So I think Jaron and the rest of the team, you guys can take a crack at that.
Thanks, Natalie, for that question. Indeed, the process of increasing women's participation was not the most easiest process, but it was a very deliberate process throughout the program. And so one of the things that we did is, with these paralegals who go through an intensive training, among the aspects that are embedded in the training is how to be deliberate about ensuring that throughout meetings that the women voices are heard. And throughout the process of mobilizing, we have both two mobilizers, one a female and a male mobilizer, and they are very deliberate about how they put out the message to ensure that they invite women and men. And so there's a deliberate effort, even as we mobilize for meetings, to be able to increase women's participation. Of course, we document the women's participation throughout meetings, and we're able to see what is the most ideal time, to convene these meetings that ensures that women are able to have finished their, domestic related assignments and are able to participate. If it's market days, we look at a time where women have either gone to the market and are able to come. And so even the timing that we convene these meetings is conscious of the most ideal time to have women participate. David, Jaron, Sophie, any other additions?
Yes, thank you, Aileen. Also to add to that, concerning the culture of the communities that we've been working in, these are highly patriarchal communities, and in some instances, men will not sit with women in the same meeting, or when they start, women might not have the ability to speak up. In that way, that separate meetings are organized where women discuss their issues, their interests, and then agree on one person who will present while the rest support this person. And then they come to a central meeting, and then this person, this one confident vocal person, speaks, and all the women will be like, that's our position. In that way, their interests, what they look up to, is actually considered in the larger meetings as well.
Just two other quick things I'd like to mention is something that we've started doing more recently is really fostering leadership development at the community level. The paralegals will identify the women leaders at the community and really spend extra time and effort working with them and make sure that they're part of these marches that go in to Nairobi, to the Ministry of Land, and that they're representing their communities to the government. And we have seen that that has been very, very helpful. And then finally, it also helps that there are some strong provisions in the Community Land Act and Kenya's constitution that not only protect but enhance women's rights generally and women's land rights specifically. And we know that the law in many cases can be nothing more than words on a piece of paper, and things do not change overnight. But our paralegals and community members, through looking at the law, have really started to slowly change norms that relate to women's ability to access and make decisions over community land. And this is work that will continue over years and generations, but we really feel like the seed has been planted and good things are happening. So thank you so much, Natalie, for that question. Philister, if you're there, is there anything that you would like to add as a woman from the community and a paralegal?
Hello, Felista, are you there?
Yes.
Would you love to add anything to the discussion on how you ensured that women participated in the meetings?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Women, in our communities, they don't usually have that courage of participating in meetings. But the elements that increase them to participate is to take to other areas like other meetings in Nanyuki, Emali. Those women got more empowered, and now they were able to stand and participate in meetings. And also, we encourage women to participate by asking questions when they were together with the elders. Now they got that courage of participating.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
That's wonderful. And just to clarify, what Phyllis was speaking of is some of that leadership development that I mentioned, that we have been able to support women from the communities that they're working in to visit others, to learn from them and the work that they've done in their own communities. Mohammed, do you think we can move to the next question?
Yeah, thanks, Jaron and team, for that. So we have a question as well from Kulamo Bulo. Kulamo, if you're on the line, I'll go ahead and unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead, Kulamo. Kulamo, are you still with us? Kulamo, are you able to ask your question? Okay, I think he may have some technical difficulties. Let me just go ahead and read it. So his question was, are you working with pockets of communities or is it general public in the identified counties?
Thank you, Kulamo. I think that's a really interesting question. So over the past 2 years have really been a process where we have been testing a legal empowerment approach to this law. So the way that we worked is Namati partnered with 3 incredibly powerful grassroots organizations that are deeply rooted in their own communities and already trusted. And they worked to identify paralegals in several selected communities that they already had relationships with. So in many ways, the communities that participated in this first round, these 11 communities, were identified by these grassroots organizations because they already had some context in them. Now, we know that that's not enough. These are 11 communities. There are thousands of affected communities in Kenya, hundreds of thousands and millions around the world. So we are actually just beginning a second phase of our work with all of our partners where we're going to be focused much more on reaching out to communities that proactively ask for support in knowing the law, using the law, and shaping the law. In addition to that, we are also planning early next year, and I think this actually gets to your next question that I'm reading right now, of where we are going to be testing a number of messages to see what resonates with people at the community level, to get key messages across about the law, and then provide opportunities for communities to contact paralegals directly and ask for support, so that we're really able to respond to community demand as communities become more informed about the law itself. David, I think anything you'd like to add to that? No, and Kulima, I don't know if you're able to hear or type at this point, but does that answer your question? Because I also see your next question is that most communities in Samburu or Marsabit counties, which for people that aren't as familiar with Kenya geography, those are very, very rural communities, oftentimes with limited access to information. They know very much about their traditional knowledge, but know very little, if anything, about the Community Land Act. And the question was, how is Namati and partners working to bridge that knowledge gap? And we think that that's a huge challenge. David, you want to mention just a little bit more about how we're trying to approach building public awareness and influencing public discourse around this law?
Yes, so we are having deliberate efforts to ensure that firstly, the law is popularized, that the discourse, the narrative around implementation of the law is mainstreamed and everyone gets to know about it, that the CSOs, even at national and county level, start to talk about the necessity to support communities to implement the law so they can strengthen tenure over their lands. And also speaking to the fact that communities have in a rich wealth of knowledge as regards their land and how we plan to bridge that with the requirements of the Community Land Act. One is that we see the Act as an opportunity for communities to even strengthen their traditional systems. But an example is, for example, if communities have a way to manage their land and natural resources, let's say grazing patterns, that they can document that in their bylaws, and once registered, that traditional way or mechanism of grazing is then protected. That the law provides an opportunity to even support communities realign their customs with national law. For example, women never participated in governance, but with this new law, there's an opportunity to support communities, even strengthen that position of ensuring that women participate. For example, in the community where Felista comes from, women are now on the committee that is tasked with managing land and natural resources. This is This had never happened before, but with the provision in the Act, communities have been supported to do that, as well as strengthening some of their, like the good customary practices they've been leading.
That's right, David. I think Kulama raises a critical question, a critical aspect that we appreciate as an institution of the power and knowledge that lies in communities. And even as we go in communities, we are cognizant of that traditional knowledge. And one of the things that we are keen to do is one, to harness the traditional knowledge that exists in communities, especially around issues to do with climate resilience, and ensure that that traditional knowledge is equally captured within the bylaws that continue to guide how communities manage their land and natural resources. And so I think it's very critical for us to be able to appreciate the wealth of knowledge that lies with communities and in communities.
Just one final thing to mention about your question about this knowledge gap is that we've been speaking a lot about the power of people-driven advocacy, but we've also been increasingly working on increasing our people-driven media engagement as well. So Francis, our paralegal and good friend on the line now, has published a significant, long, very powerful letter to the editor in one of Kenya's largest daily newspapers. The demonstration that David Francis described was covered on live television, on national television. And just on Saturday, a national televised report that was like 7 minutes long was on national TV again, that followed what has happened since those original applications were submitted. And Numati has been very deliberate that we are in the background completely during all of this media engagement. We're not out there wearing t-shirts with our logos on it. In fact, we're very purposely trying to stay in the background because we are true believers in the power of this people-driven advocacy and don't think NGOs need to be all over everything. The power of the people is so incredibly important, and we see one of our main roles as helping to elevate those voices rather than speaking on their behalf. So thank you for that question, and apologies for the long answer.
Thanks.
Mohammed, can we move to the next question?
Yeah, thanks guys for that very comprehensive answer. So we also have a question from Malumbo Chipofia, and I see Malumbo is online. I'll go ahead and unmute you and just ask that you, if you are able to, you ask your question directly to the attendees. Malumbo, are you able to ask your question? Malumbo? Yeah, I think we're facing a few difficulties with some of our attendees. And so I'll go ahead and just ask the question as well on his behalf. So the question actually started with a comment. Hi, very powerful stories there. I'm just wondering where the data about the land boundaries were or are kept, how they are protected, how they have been used to demand the land rights. Did the ministry accept the maps?
So thank you, Malumbo. This is a very fascinating question and a question that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. And I just wanted to clarify about how this mapping is done. So according to the Community Land Act, all community land that is being legally claimed needs to be mapped by an official government surveyor. So because of that, what we have really focused on is supporting communities to use locally available methods that can look differently in different places. In some places, it's drawing an estimated map on a piece of paper. In others, it may be sketching a map and describing boundaries in words. And in others, communities might want to take the next step and do GPS mapping and more technical mapping. But no matter what, the government is going to come in and do this again. So what we feel is important and what we're really trying to test is, rather than focus on technical mapping, we're focusing on supporting communities to be empowered to lead the government mapping process that needs to be done no matter what. We have done a lot of experimenting with different types of participatory mapping, and it is incredibly empowering, but it's also incredibly expensive and incredibly resource demanding in terms of time and logistical concerns. And especially when we're talking about communities that are truly just massive, that, you know, using GPS maps could mean you're walking in the bush for like 2 months to do this, when the practice would basically just have to be done again. So at this stage, we're not collecting technical spatial data. And where it has been done, that data and the GPS maps remain within the communities, and the communities plan to use those to guide government surveyors. So you also asked if the ministry has accepted the maps. They did not accept the maps, but they also didn't reject the maps. The legal requirement is that communities are able to describe the land that they are claiming, so that then they are able to lead the government surveying process. But, you know, we're still learning about this, so we'll have to see how it plays out. But at this stage, we're more focused on empowering the community to lead this process rather than doing technical mapping. David, Eileen, anything you guys want to add to that?
So one thing that is required in the Act for communities to register is a description of their claim. And as it's written in the Act, it's bracketed. There's a bracket and indicated sketch map. So the communities that approached the ministry, some had digital maps, some had sketch maps to support their application. And that, so the ministry took those applications and stamped to demonstrate that they received applications and will be processing as promised in the 4 months. But ideally, we saw mapping as an opportunity to support communities first to deliberate and discuss their claim, their boundaries and natural resources in preparation for that when the government surveyor comes, the communities are prepared and they will be the ones to direct and guide the government surveyor instead of the reverse. We also realize that digital mapping can be useful probably later on to have up-to-scale maps that communities can use for planning purposes. When we start to talk about zoning, grazing patterns, that can easily be discussed over up-to-scale map. But again, looking at our focus currently, we are focused on supporting communities to prepare for registration and claim demand for registration. We are really focused on supporting them to be able to describe their claim.
Mohammed, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah, I see that, Jaron, and I also see we have a few, like 2 people with their hands raised. So I would like to invite Alexander. Alexander is joining us, I believe, all the way from Canada, and he seems to have a question that he would love to ask us as well. So Alexander, I have unmuted you, so please go ahead and ask your question.
Good morning, everybody, and warm greetings from Canada. I'm really so excited to participate in this discussion and to hear the talk of like-minded people from Africa. So my question is simple. Is there a way that a law clerk or people with legal background based in Canada to support these activities in other countries overseas? I believe a lot can be done. I hope it's not necessary to be physically present in the countries. So yeah, thank you. This is my question.
Thanks, Alexander. Jaron and team, take a crack at it.
So this is a really interesting question. Thank you for asking that. I don't think we've ever been asked that so directly before. You know, I think something that we have learned is the best thing that we can do is put the power in the hands of the people that are being affected by the problem. And one of the challenges with this work is that, you know, we and our partners have been working in just these 11 communities. There's truly thousands and thousands of communities that are facing similar challenges. And, you know, this is not an outright call for like donating money to Namati, but from really working with different institutions in your countries to raise the importance of Indigenous peoples' land rights and community land rights, to help get this on the agenda. Right now, I feel like we're fighting against the tide. So many of the major institutions like the World Bank and even many governments, including the United States government, is focusing much more on individual land rights and taking these lands that are so important that were described and subdividing them into like 1 acre plots, which, you know, as Francis and Phyllis had described, that would destroy their entire livelihood and way of life. So I think one of the things to do is really reach out to those like-minded organizations, to people, to even people within your governments, and explain why protecting community land should be a priority, why people like Francis and Phyllis are, why their lives matter, why the way that they have lived for generations and want to continue living their lives matter, to figure out how we can adequately support communities like theirs to become as empowered as they are themselves. That's a quick answer. I would also like to actually think about your question a little bit more and possibly connect with you offline. But those are some initial thoughts. David, Eileen, any ideas?
I mean, I know he has also asked, Alex has also asked another question around which counties we were focusing in at the moment, and maybe just to highlight that for the counties that we have worked in now, Turkana, Tana River, Kajiado, Laikipia, and Isiolo. We have plans to increase 1 or more 2 counties, but we're still in conversations on which counties these will be. And so at the moment, those are the counties that we're working in. The aspects of whether these counties have registries, I think as David and Jaron said, is this is fairly a new law, and it's now that the ministry is trying to roll the implementation of this particular law. There's of course going to be deliberate efforts to develop a registry that is specific to community land. That has not begun yet, but we are aware that the ministry is putting together thoughts about putting a specific registry around community land.
Sorry, and Alexander, I think we misread your question a little bit. You're asking about countries, not necessarily regions within Kenya. And Namati's community land protection work is primarily focused in Kenya and Sierra Leone. This webinar is focused almost exclusively on our work in Kenya. But through the Global Legal Empowerment Network, we also work to share resources that can be adapted to individual country contexts and legal frameworks. And we're also always happy to engage with people that are doing this type of work in other countries to share lessons and also to learn from the work that you're doing. Mohammed, we might have time for one more question.
Yeah, we actually have very interesting and amazing questions coming in through to us through our panel. And so we might not be able to get to all of them in time, but let me read out one more from Emmanuel Bryant. And yeah, so Emmanuel asks, how do you deal with individuals who feel the Community Land Act goes against their own indigenous management, which is negotiated over time between different communities, sometimes on an ad hoc basis, e.g. following droughts? Also, how can the Community Land Act be implemented if there is resistance from the county government? So it's a wordy and lengthy question. I don't know if you managed to get that, Jaron.
Yes, we have, and I'll pass it over to David and Eileen to share some thoughts on both those questions. They're all very real things that we face.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting question from Emmanuel. You know, different communities have different ways of managing their land and natural resources. And so one of the things that our work so far has been doing is for communities that have, you know, an existing model or framework of how they manage their resources and allow other communities, so the neighboring, because pastoral communities move and have informal arrangements on how they welcome other people to come. One of the things that we do during the bylaws development is ensure that these communities are able to incorporate that arrangement, you know, the ad hoc or the informal arrangement that they've always had on how they welcome communities and how, you know, neighboring communities, and some of the rules that even the communities that they welcome need to abide to as they access the resources within those communities.
Thank you, Eileen. Actually, as we were discussing, as we began to think about this work, one of the things that came up as an opportunity was the fact that the Community Land Act in itself supports to preserve the customary way of life, supports to preserve pastoralism. And the opportunity is that given the opportunity to strengthen governance, and I'm talking about bylaws that are specific to the practice, the customary practice. For example, how do we do seasonal grazing? How do we ensure that seasonal access rights are protected and respected? How do we ensure that the conflict resolution, the local conflict, traditional conflict resolution mechanisms that we already have are protected? That the bylaws give an opportunity to document that, so that once registered, it becomes a legal, it's a binding document. And so that is preserved. The opportunity that the CLA provides is also to support communities align their practices with national law. An example that I gave earlier on was, for example, ensuring that women are part of the management committee. We know that the Constitution of Kenya provides for the 2/3 gender rule, that one gender cannot take more than 2/3 in terms of composition of any committee. So, like that is an opportunity to support communities align their governance mechanisms, while also strengthening their good customary practices. So actually, the Act is an opportunity to preserve the traditional way of life.
Yeah, and the second part where Emmanuel asks, what happens where a county resists the implementation of the Community Land Act? I think for us, one of our approach has been, sort of generating that political will from the different levels, from the county level, but also from the government, from the national level. So helping county governments understand why this is important and how this is central for them in realizing their development agenda at the county level. And so we, as we interact with county governments, are deliberate about helping counties understand why implementing this particular law is important and how this meets their development needs and aspiration at the county level. We do the same equally at the national level to be able to generate that political will that is needed to effectively implement the law.
And it's interesting, I think we've actually seen more resistance at the national level than the county level. Many of the counties where we and our partners have been working are predominantly pastoralist counties, where government officials even identify supporting the implementation of this law in their annual development strategic plan, essentially. And we're also seeing, as more of the general public becomes more and more aware of the law and desires to see it implemented, they're starting to put political pressure on their leaders also. And I think the longer it's delayed, this political pressure is only going to increase and increase. We're not talking about a few people here. There's more than 3.5 million people just in Kenya that are affected by this issue. And that, through the work that Namati, our partners, and others are doing, we think that this consciousness around this law will just continue to increase, and the political pressure will also continue to increase. So it's something that we're very much aware of and focused on, and would welcome any other ideas that you might have also.
And I also think that question speaks to the why we have this webinar today. Is that for sustainable change, to ensure that the county government, does it as the communities want, that is the communities themselves that are pushing for the change. So if organized, knowledgeable of their rights and entitlement, communities will sustain the pressure, the push for things to work to their interest. And so I think that question really speaks to the why we have this webinar today.
David, and I think that's just a wonderful kind of closing thought to this webinar. We just really want to reinforce that legal empowerment is really an effective strategy, not just to support people at the community level to know the law and use the law, but also to get organized and demand that the government implements laws that it might not be so keen to implement itself. And to be just fully honest with everyone, we've seen the strategy be much more effective than when we advocate ourselves, or even some of our colleagues in other organizations advocate for themselves. So if this is not a strategy that you've tried in your own organizations, we encourage you to do so. We would also love to continue this conversation through the Global Legal Empowerment Network and hear about your experiences supporting people to advocate in their own voices. Because, you know, as I said, we certainly don't have this all figured out yet. And we're really eager to learn from your experience as well about how to best support people-driven advocacy and government engagement. So with that, I want to thank everyone so much from our end. This was a wonderful opportunity, great questions, and Mohammed, I'll pass it back off to you, and hopefully you can help the participants know how we can continue this conversation off the webinar platform. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jaron. I'd like to actually thank all the presenters, especially Francis and Felista, who've joined us all the way from Isiolo and Kajiado. They through a phone call, which is so amazing, yet another fast in our webinars, and also just the entire community land protection team and their partners. This brings us to the end of our formal part of our webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the excellent points and the amazing questions. And yeah, thank you, Vivek Trivedi, who has been very amazing at fielding questions at the back end. And last but not least, Jaron, Aileen, David, and Sophie for bringing us together to discuss this important topic. So as Jaron mentioned, you're all invited to become a member of the Global Legal Empowerment Network. Just go to namati.org/network, and then you can join. We will be in touch by email with a reminder of how to link to this recording, which we will be sharing on our online platform, as well as a link to where the discussions will continue. And you would actually get an opportunity to engage with all our presenters for the day, the community land protection team, and even members of these communities at their convenience. So thank you everyone, and goodbye, and have a nice rest of your day.